Well, hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Baumgarten, and I am the Koch Professor of Practice of Family Enterprise at Olin Business School. It is my great honor to welcome you to the fourth and final installment of our sixth annual and first virtual. How was that for the number of numbers that were thrown in there? Family Business Symposium. And our goal in this particular symposium has been to take us around the globe and also throughout town in understanding the various different ways that ownership structure and culture of organizations, family and otherwise, can drive the performance of various different forms of business. In fact, if you look back at the last several weeks, in the first week we started in India, and we heard from the former chairman of Tata Consulting Services, one of the world's largest global technology consulting firms. In the second week, we transitioned over to Cuba, and we heard a bit about the world of spirits and the world of Bacardi and the Bacardi family and how they have approached their own business. In the third week, we transitioned to the world of global finance, but centered in New York by hearing from St. Louis's own George Walker and his employee-owned firm, Neuberger Berman. And this week, we return back to the city of St. Louis, and in particular, focus in around our sports franchises that are housed here in the city itself. So for those of you that have been following along, you've also seen the way that we've structured this symposium is to move from these keynote addresses to various different touch points in a panel afterwards for people living this world inside the city of St. Louis. And sometimes those were incredibly large firms, well-established, crossing state lines and customers around the globe. And sometimes they were smaller firms. And our hope in doing that is to be able to show you how the dynamics that we're seeing at the keynote level naturally fit into the dynamics that are experienced for you all, whether your business is small or large, whether you are employee owned, whether you are family owned, or whether you're a publicly traded firm. We are hoping to cross-pollinate various different forms of insight in this particular symposium. And I think in a lot of ways, it has been a great success. In doing this, in making the touch points, both from the global leaders all the way down to the local leaders, our hope is really to live out the vision of our chancellor of not merely being Washington University in St. Louis, but also Washington University for St. Louis. And there is no better way to be for St. Louis than to look at some of the organizations that we are going to be describing and learning from here today. So in a short bit, I'm going to turn it back over to our wonderful host, Spencer Burke, my colleague, who is the Eugene F. Williams Jr. Executive in Residence, and our three distinguished sports franchise owners. But I'd be remiss if I did not thank two particular groups in regards to making this possible. The first is obviously the Koch family and for their support, wonderful support of all the things that we've been doing, both in the symposium and across the center itself. And then secondarily, to thank the St. Louis Sports Commission for their partnership with the Koch Center for today's session. As the new director of the Koch Center, I'm incredibly excited to be able to find a way to bring this type of content to you, not only in our symposiums, but in various different forms of thought leadership around the year, around the calendar year. And today's event is a perfect example of what we're attempting to do. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Spencer, who is going to introduce our three different panelists for today's session. Spencer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome to everybody, and welcome to our three wonderful representatives of our sports teams that exist and are going to come on the scene shortly in the case of St. Louis City SC, our great soccer franchise. So we have Carolyn Betz, we have Bill DeWitt, and we have Tom Stillman. So welcome to the three of you, and thank you for participating. It's with great pride that we have you here because we really can't think of three better people with three better organizations that speak so loudly about how great St. Louis is. And you do so much for the community. And so much of that has to do with culture and philanthropy and giving back, as well as putting great teams on the field. So we thank you for that. I would be remiss not to mention the sacrifices that our hockey team and our Cardinals have been making to deal with this COVID pandemic. And I'm sure in the case of Carolyn that it's disrupted her plans as well as she builds out the stadium and tries to works on building her team. But we know that it's been a rough road, and we hope that we're obviously all very excited about better times ahead, but we want you to know that we're completely sympathetic with all the travails that you both have been through, putting teams out there with no fans it's got to be very challenging. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. I get asked often with these symposia, well, why do we have those speakers when we're talking about family business? That's what it's called, the Family Business Symposium. Well, in this case, it's kind of a fun answer. And for those that don't know, family ownership is the dominant form of ownership in professional sports, be it football, basketball, baseball, hockey, and soon to be soccer in St. Louis. So it's a particularly interesting topic of how professional sports leagues deal with the issue of family business. And today we're going to highlight two very important areas where the connection between sports franchise ownership and family business come together. The first is culture, which is our topic, so we'll get to that. But the other one that's a little more subtle is the issue of ownership and how ownership transitions when you own a sports franchise. And through ownership, everybody that knows family business is aware that you have to confront a number of key issues as time marches on. There's governance, there's succession planning, and then there's how you deal with the what we call the 3Ds of family business: death, disability, and divorce, sort of unpleasant topics. But how do these major sports leagues deal with that in the context of families owning sports teams? So what's interesting about this is that they have developed what I would call a shield or a defense mechanism to protect the league and the other owners from some of the frequent travails of family businesses. And they do that through this concept called a controlling owner. And I want to turn the floor over to Bill DeWitt. Now, Bill has the asset of being a third generation sort of Cardinals executive. His grandfather, his father, and now himself been with the Cardinals. So he's seen this in action. So Bill, would you tell us a little bit about this controlling owner concept and how it works, just so people have a feel for it? And then I'd like to ask both Tom and Carolyn, when Bill finishes that, to comment on how different it might be in MLS or in the NHL. Bill, could you take that away for us?
Sure. Thanks, Spencer, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, as you said, there's been over the years a lot of incidents that have led to owners either doing something stupid or, passing along ownership control to people that might not have been approved by the league, and all sorts of things that led to the league and MLB to say that somebody has to be the control person. And typically it's the largest shareholder. Doesn't always have to be in MLB. Sometimes a large shareholder will have other things that he or she wants to be doing primarily, and they'll designate somebody to be the controlling person. But usually it's the largest shareholder. In the case of the Cardinals, that's my father. But so it's just a way for the league to be able to say one person for every decision, and they have sort of the ultimate authority within the team. Now, there are some limitations to that that have been sort of tested a little bit over the years, whereby maybe a disgruntled minority shareholder can appeal to the league for relief from some tyrannical reign or something. I'm over dramatizing it, but you get the idea that the commissioner his authority is supersedes the control person designation issue, so that to the extent that you have some big conflict or whatever, and somebody who might have a bigger percentage than the control person who is disgruntled for some reason, the commissioner can say, okay, we're changing the control person. Wow. And it's going from X to Y. So that's how it works in baseball. It's been effective in sort of streamlining things and resolving larger disputes that can be messy and avoid sort of the courts in most cases. Yeah,
it's interesting. I was thinking the NHL is a virtual laboratory on how this concept has evolved, because with the family ownership and the longevity of some of the families, they have gotten into a number of generational transitions, in some cases 2 and 3, and problems inevitably come up. And it's just sort of interesting to watch the dynamics there. Tom, in the NHL, is it a similar arrangement with controlling owner? Because it's such a key concept for running the league. Is it the same there?
Yes, very similar. The league requires that one person have operating control. And, I have always thought of it as a measure not as much designed at succession, but designed at just being able to act and be nimble. I mean, the classic example being, you can't have a board of directors meeting every time you want to have a player transaction or, similar thing. I mean, you just can't do that. So it's one person has operational control. The league will allow, approval, veto rights on extraordinary events, types of things like you would see in other agreements for minority stakeholders. But by and large, it's one person has operating control.
Interesting. Now, Carolyn, you just won the franchise rights here. So you've obviously been through this recently of controlling owner of your club. Is that you, or is it another family? I think you're the owner, aren't you? You're 51% owner.
Well, technically, actually, Andy and my mom own more. So MLS has the board of governors, of course. So there's up to 3 people that are appointed to make decisions, because in the LAFC example, I believe they have something like 20 different owners. And so some of these newer franchises had multiple owners. So of course, I think to Tom's point, they don't want to bring 20 people to a meeting. But in similar to what Bill was saying, unfortunately, there was an incident at the end of last year where the MLS came in and did actually take a club back because there was an issue with an owner. And so right now, I believe that the team is owned or is being controlled by MLS with the hopes of trying to find another owner that will invest in the team as well.
Interesting. Well, the big controversy going on in the NFL today on this is the Denver Broncos, where the owner was afflicted with Alzheimer's and designated a group of trustees to pick the successor out of 7 children from 2 different marriages. And I shouldn't say, needless to say, it didn't work out, but it didn't work out, and there's no agreement. And the NFL is in the unenviable position of trying to enforce the controlling owner clause. And the way they're doing it is by starting to fine the individual family members millions of dollars until they get this resolved. And it's not so much who they pick, it's just they've got to pick somebody, because as you say, each of you have said, you can't have 7 people coming to a meeting. So anyway, very important concept, highly relevant to family businesses. And the message there is it really is important to have somebody in control of things, so you know who the boss is. That's really important. Well, let's turn to the topic at hand, and that's culture. And I thought I'd lead off with Carolyn here. She's in the position of building a culture. So Carolyn, will you tell us what it's like to be de novo with a professional sports franchise, with a sport that we all know a lot about, but not the professional side of it as much? Could you talk about that?
Sure. I think from day one, both the Taylor family and the Kavanaugh family said we wanted to have, a great product both on and off the pitch. And so as we sort of went through this whole process with MLS, one thing that always is resonating with me is the commissioner said, if you're a successful club, the community owns your club, not the ownership. And I think we've really sort of used that as kind of the foundation of how important it is to make sure that we are not only putting a great product on the field to attract fans, but we're also making sure that we're getting into that community and using an international sport like soccer to unite this region. I think the second piece is, coming from a 3rd generation family that's had a successful business for almost 65 years, you learn a lot about how important that culture is. And it starts from the top all the way down. So from the ownership group down to, the 5 salespeople we hired on Monday, we want to make sure that the very first thing we do is onboard them with, the deck on our culture. And this is what's important to us. This is how we're going to act. And this is what we expect out of our employees. And again, both whether it's at work or at home. So I think, and certainly having, my mom and my uncle present, Andy actually came to talk to the new salespeople to really just sit here and reinforce, we will be great citizens, hopefully in the professional sports world, of course, but also in the community. And I think just really kind of going back to those few guiding principles. And again, I can't stress enough, making sure that every single person that comes to work for this team understands, what our philosophy is, what the standard is, and what the expectation is.
That's really inspiring. I noticed on your website that you've engaged this firm, I think it's called Sportsology, and I was reading about them. What an interesting consulting firm that is. Could you tell us a little bit about the issue of soccer culture as it relates to enterprise culture? And I think for those that know about what goes on in Europe, it's sort of a fascinating juxtaposition from fan behavior to just some of the crazy things coming out of Europe. How do you prepare yourself for the world of soccer culture versus enterprise culture? Just be interesting to hear.
Well, enterprise's culture is extremely competitive, and that's why we do hire a lot of college athletes because, it's competitive. And I have to say that I'm just as competitive, if not more. So when you look at soccer, you see how competitive it is. I think the fan bases, they're very loyal. It's a younger demographic, which sort of mirrors what our, especially our new hires look like. But I think, being part of the MLS, I would say here in the US, it's probably, we say in its teenage years, it's got a lot of growth ahead, which is super exciting. But I would also say that, when I started working at Enterprise, it was still, maybe regional, borderline national. It certainly wasn't an international company. To be able to grow as Enterprise has grown to now kind of come back to soccer and watching it, the growth potential it has, I think that's really exciting as well.
I think that's great. Great way to frame it. And we're so eager to have that combination of the greatness of global soccer in St. Louis. It's going to be wonderful. I'll next turn to Tom Stillman. Tom has been the controlling owner of the Blues for 9 years, but it's interesting that he was a minority investor with the previous group before he did that, and sort of was the one that sort of put together the current group. And so, Tom, I'd love to have you talk about Blues culture, which I think some of us intuitively know what that looks like. But tell us a little more about it and how, if at all, it has changed under your leadership and over the 54 years that we've had professional hockey in St. Louis, which is kind of a remarkable accomplishment, 54 years of great hockey. So tell us about Blues culture.
Well, it's interesting that you start there with that change from having been part of the previous ownership group and move to this one, because I think our organization and our culture have changed substantially in that time. We've gone from sort of outside, non-local private equity ownership to ownership by a group of civic-minded St. Louis people. We've gone from sort of a highly leveraged situation to greater financial stability. COVID isn't helping on that. And, the financial situation, I think, caused the organization to be a little more internally focused in those days. And I think our focus is much more outward today and fan first and community first. So, in a way, we've moved from playing defense to playing offense. And so, it's allowed us to focus on, our two overriding goals rather than worrying about, are we going to be here next week? We're focused on our overriding goals, which are, one, to win a Stanley Cup and now to win another Stanley Cup, and second, to make a difference in St. Louis. And I think those are the things that motivate us. People understand that second goal is extremely important, and it is part of kind of the responsibility you take on as a pro sports franchise in a large market. So, but you're right that it has been quite a transition over the last several years.
And I'd add that it's very conspicuous what you've been doing, and I do think that having a focus, as you've described, a two-pronged focus, and winning the Stanley Cup was quite helpful, I might add. But that said, the pursuit of it is also a great goal too. But I think the city has benefited so much from the local ownership that is focused and coordinated on those two goals. So I applaud you. Bill, I'd like to have you jump in here on Cardinal culture, and I mentioned it before, but you're a third generation family in the Cardinals employ and leading it now, of course. The team, I mentioned to Bill, I was just stunned that it was 100 years old, and he corrected me that on one count it could be 140 years old and another 120. But I mean, we've got an asset here that's been around a long time, truly more than multi-generational. Bill, tell us about culture at the Cardinals and how it's evolved over the years and how you need to transition it for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you work on every day, really. It's not a one-time thing. There's no fix to a bad culture that just happens overnight. It's really, I think, how you treat people first and foremost, particularly when they're doing well or when they're doing badly. You know, do you reward good performers in the right way and keep them happy? And then when somebody makes a mistake, is it, swift punishment, or is it, sympathy and trying to get them turned around? And I think our approach has been the latter. But we did a little bit of work on our sort of approach to the overall business in late 2019. And what came out of that were 3 goals, and you've heard them from the other 2 a little bit. They're very obvious. They're very commonsensical. The first is, 3 goals every year: winning on the field, number 1; number 2, community impact; and in no particular order, number 3, financial sustainability. And I chose that. The first 2 are obvious. The third one, and we could talk more about how we go about those things, but I think, focusing on culture, the third one, financial sustainability, I chose that word sustainability very carefully, because I think that there's a lot of sort of talk out there about what a sports team should do, about signing players. Ultimately, fans care about who you have on the field, and that requires the financial resources. And we push everything we can, the limits of trying to generate revenue in order to put that back into the product and to sustain a great organization. So really, how you allocate those dollars is the topic, the important issue to be discussed among different players and things like that. And that's what makes being a fan fun, partly. And so, but what I think about in terms of financial sustainability is, can you keep doing it year after year after year? So many teams that we see fall victim to this boom bust cycle of either going for it or building up with young players and cost-cutting measures, and then all of a sudden going for it, and then it either works or it doesn't, and they come back under the bottom of the long rungs of the ladder and have to climb back out. Our philosophy is you have to be pushing always aggressively, but never put every last chip on the table all at once. Because in the sport of baseball, if you make the playoffs every year, things can happen. I mean, it's not just the best team always wins. It's, we've had the best team going into the playoffs sometimes and lost. And we've had the team that squeaked in a couple times and got all the way through October. So our belief is sustainability is the key to building that. And that's part of culture too, because our employees know that every year they have to show up. Every year it's about pushing and generating excitement and doing the things you need to do to be prepared behind the scenes to deliver a great product and a great fan experience.
I think that idea of the combination of sustainability and the consistency of your efforts to assure that are really critical. And that brings up the kind of unpleasant topic of the challenge of COVID. And I don't want to bring out a list of bad examples, but I think this outburst at the Seattle Mariners earlier in the week was sort of illustrative of the problem and that is that, and you described it, you've got sort of three legs of the stool. You've got owners that need to be made happy. You've got employees / players that need to be made happy. And those are different constituencies, of course. And then you have fans that need to be happy. And this COVID thing just puts unbelievable pressure on the best laid plans. Maybe Tom and Bill, this is really more yours because Carolyn's not yet in the throes of this, but to talk about just the how you responded to the pressure of what COVID's brought to your doorstep, and also are there any positives that come out of this? I think we would love to hear that there's something that has been learned that will help the organization long term. Tom, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'm going to be hard pressed to find an advantage or a positive. Maybe as we, look back over the, once this situation is passed, we'll be able to find some. I suppose it acts as sort of a stress test for your organization, and it certainly brings people together. And in this case, a smaller crew of people, because we've had furloughs and all. Working together, but it's it's created a tough situation. And the interesting thing about it is it's not just the things that you see that we have to change or we don't have fans. It really is both the league and the clubs dealing with such uncertainty for such a long period of time. I know at the league office, at times they had to be, working down, 10 hypothetical approaches because they don't know which way the pandemic's going to go. And, in the early days, we didn't know as much about it. So it's just a long time of, being in this very fluid situation. And then it's also figuring out, going back to Bill's goal of financial sustainability. It is, with your eye on that, how are we going to preserve ourselves, not get ourselves in too much trouble for down the road? Because it'd be all right on this one, but if it's followed by some other shock to the system, that could be difficult.
And Bill, your club's been around for 140 years, so you've seen a thing or two, as they say. Could you talk about just the COVID stress, what you've learned from it, what others can learn from it, because it's certainly obviously a terrible situation that you've been dealing with.
Yeah, I think about the Warren Buffett quote that I'm going to probably botch, but it's something to the effect of, when the tide goes out, you find out who doesn't have pants on. It's really been devastating to the industry financially. Obviously, a number of people have lost their jobs, both at the league level and at the team level. We've tried to be a little bit more forward-looking about the employees. We did make some moves that streamlined the organization, but much fewer than other teams did. I had some of my counterparts call me and say, well, how come you guys didn't do as many layoffs and cut back on seniors executive salaries and X, Y, and Z and all these things that they were doing? And I said, well, tell me how big your organization is, and they would say, well, we have 450 people and this blah, blah, blah. And I said, how much are your senior guys making? In candid conversations, because these were difficult, we were in the throes of it. And they would tell me, and I'd say, well, we don't have that many people and we're not paying our top people that much to where it's, we didn't have to recruit somebody in. These are people we've built up. And so therefore the bloodbath wasn't as big. And also the philosophy for us of, sticking by our people and holding them through this difficult time, carrying them through, we think is going to pay off for us in the long term, particularly with things like culture. But there's no question it's been difficult. Tom mentioned the uncertainty. I mean, we would normally at this time have sold probably more than half of the season out in terms of what we're going to sell. Half of the tickets would have already been sold right now. And we'd be up at around, by opening day in April, 70% of tickets sold for the upcoming season. Right now we're at 0,
Wow.
because we don't know what we're selling.
Right.
We're working with the city on our capacity, and that's a sort of a push-pull that is, going to be finalized here in the next week or so. But, let's say it's 20 to 30% capacity. Once we lock that in, okay, then we go to our key holders and sell tickets and have them choose. And it's different for fans now too, because they won't just have their tickets. They're going to be choosing from various options versus what they used to know from a season holder standpoint. So tons of uncertainty, and also very huge losses last year and this year that thank goodness we've been at it for a long time and had created that sense of financial stability, working with our bankers to help us get through it and so forth and so on. But not every team was so lucky. I mean, there have been teams that have had huge capital calls. The Mets were sold essentially as a result of the financial distress. And I wouldn't be surprised if other sales occur as a result. But, it's just something we're all dealing with. Nobody should have a pity party for us. We're all, doing fine. It's just our businesses are in a difficult spot, and we're all trying to do the right thing to get to the other side of this.
Well, I mean, our hearts go out to all of you, and then obviously a lot of challenges by your constituency and people ill and even dying. So it's tragic. I do want to bring up the acquisition of your new third baseman. The article in the Post-Dispatch about the Cardinal way and how Nolan Arenado, what he spoke about the Cardinals, said everything about culture. Would you describe that a little bit, and how that had to make you feel great about the importance of culture and sustainability?
Yeah, no, that was nice to see. I think his comments were, his reactions basically to what he was seeing in Jupiter in his first camp in the Cardinals organization. And it's really about people and about your leadership structure up and down through the baseball development and scouting system. And, I look back at George Kissel, who's deceased now, but he was one of the guys who was sort of the ultimate cultural icon for a team like the Cardinals, because he taught the fundamentals of the sport to generations of players, and each generation had found their championship stride, and all the way back to Stan Musial, and you go up through Gibson and Brock and Shane Yeats and all these people who, trained and played and learned under George Kissel. And he was a career minor league instructor. He never aspired to be the major league manager because he just loved working with kids. And I think, that's the kind of thing that we'd love to clone George, and we've tried, but it didn't work. But it just, those are the sorts of people that you have to take care of and use as models and really emphasize and highlight in your organization when you have somebody like that, because everybody who worked with him spoke about how passionate he was for passing along the skills and fundamentals of the game, and then the attitude, the winning attitude. So that's, it's about the people and the expectations that Carolyn mentioned. It's expectation. You've got to lay that out clearly, and our baseball guys do a great job of doing that.
Well, I was going to say the paper this morning describes spring training starting, I guess, on Monday, and how the emptiness of missing so many of your all-stars that can't travel because of COVID, won't be there for one reason or another, or have passed away, and your legacy with these heroes of everybody. It's that talk about adding to culture. That's incredible. Go back to Tom for a second on this dynamic of dealing with selling tickets and health limits on how many people can be in a stadium. How do you deal with it? You're in the middle of the season and it's constantly changing from nobody can be in the stands to, I guess it's 20%, then 30, and then 50. Talk a little bit about that, because that was one of the questions that's come in from the audience. How do you manage that?
Well, the business side of the organization, led by Chris Zimmerman, has been working with St. Louis health authorities for weeks and weeks now, and it's we are following NHL protocols, which, I mean, hundreds of pages, literally. The detail is mind-boggling, and we're following those, and as augmented by what the health authorities want to see, and then it becomes almost a trust-building exercise to show the authorities how we're going to handle people in the arena. And we started with 300, which was mainly friends and family, and then a few frontline workers that we, brought in with comp tickets. And then we have, in building confidence and showing the health authorities how we're going to handle things and that things would be run safely, we've been able to go to 1,400, then 2,100, and we're just growing it as we go along. Ticketing generally is complicated, but to have it being changed all the time is literally unbelievable. Yeah, on the ticketing front, like Bill says, we once we were able to have ticketed fans, then you've got to figure out how you're going to do that. And season ticket holders don't get their usual seats, but they get priority in buying seats based on their tenure and their level of tickets and all that sort of thing. But, you're trying to keep your fans happy, but not everybody can get tickets.
It's unbelievable. Well, Carolyn, you must be somewhat relieved that you're not dealing with that, but you're dealing with a lot of other things like a major construction project. I wanted to circle back to you on this issue of culture, because it's very obvious from looking at your website but I would encourage people to take a look at, because there was lots of interesting information there, including a video spot that you can watch the construction of the new soccer stadium, which is elegant to say the least. But I wanted to circle back and talk about the role of professional sports franchises in terms of civic development, urban renewal, community unity, and all that. Because I know you've talked about it, and your family's talked about the importance of uniting St. Louis. Could you talk about that a little bit more? And I'd love you to talk about this young Bosnian player that you've already recruited, and tell people about that, because that's sort of a way to combine, of course, soccer and community in one individual. Could you address this issue of civic engagement with the team?
Absolutely. Well, let me start with congratulating both Tom and Bill on what they've done with their teams, because one of the things that I've noticed is that there's accessibility to players and coaches. And so whether it's at a school fundraiser or a sporting event, I think both of these gentlemen have done a very good job making sure that their players and their coaches are out in the communities, which I have learned almost endears the community to be more supportive. Buy tickets, come to the parties, the Stanley Cup parties, and so on and so forth. And so we really use that also too as sort of a benchmark. And so one of the things that we've said to everybody is, like I said, if they've onboarded, our players need to be in the communities. They need to be, whether they're coaching, whether they're attending events, because I believe that's how we're going to get the support we need just outside of buying tickets. I think the other thing that's been a really kind of fun journey for me, and I feel bad sort of admitting this, but I'm okay admitting it, was I had no idea how many micro communities we had in the St. Louis region. And it really is a very international community. And so it has been fun going to all these different little, neighborhoods that I didn't know existed. And so when we really started thinking about soccer, what it means, the international footprint, the potential to hopefully recruit international companies, international families to come to St. Louis and stay in St. Louis, we started to realize that soccer is a great way just to make them feel at home, if you will. And so we hired Matt Seaback, our chief experience officer, and some, as we look towards, basically 2 years of filling content before we actually have a match, we're trying to figure out how to start intertwining, whether it's a food experience, whether it's an art experience, but finding ways to reach into these international communities and sort of bring them to the forefront. And using myself as an example, people that may not have known the strong Bosnian community or the incredible Croatian community we have. And so really, because like I said, there's really not going to be a team for 2 years. It's how do you find other ways to engage the entire region with your club and what you're trying to do.
It really is inspiring, and you got a head start, as you well know, because of the prevalence of all the youth soccer leagues, which has been one of the incredible assets of this region, coming from obviously the ethnic background of the city and the Catholic youth leagues and all that. But that's going to be very powerful. There's also, maybe you could comment on this, the demographics of soccer, of the audience, the fan base. And I just think it's interesting, hockey, baseball, soccer, you're really looking at, they're overlapping for sure, but they're also very discrete in terms of the fan profile that goes with each. Can you talk about the likely fan profile for MLS soccer in St. Louis?
Yeah, I would say the average age of the typical soccer fan is 35 to 40. And so as we're thinking about, what's our stadium going to look like when it opens, hopefully in late 2022, and it's going to be very much of a digital experience. Really trying to take customer experience right now and figure out how do you merge the technology piece, the expectations with the demographic that has grown up literally on a mobile phone. And so one of the things that we're coming to realize is we're not even probably going to ever offer a paper ticket, because what's the point? I would take a paper ticket, my mom would take a paper ticket, but the generation behind me is so used to doing everything on those mobile devices. And so really trying to figure out how to customize that experience for a demographic that, from everything I've been told, is a little bit younger than your typical hockey fan or your typical baseball fan. I think it also, though, allows us to really have to be creative on sort of the experiences within the stadium. So sort of this micro neighborhood community where it may be really all about food and beverage. One corner may be really all about the sport. One may be designed for socializing. So I'm a single 32-year-old female who wants to just go out and be seen. And so really having to dig into not only the age, but also ethnicity for the stadium is sort of helping. It's kind of having to push us outside of what would be a traditional experience, both on match day and off match day.
And I assume the food offerings would reflect some of this international appeal of soccer fans.
Definitely. And that's been some feedback we've gotten pretty much from the very beginning. And that is, please make sure that you do have all sorts of offerings, as maybe it's an introduction. So I use the example of, has somebody in Chesterfield ever been down to Cherokee Street to get authentic tacos? What our hope is that at our stadium, we're bringing that experience to somebody who may or may not have ever done that. And so, looking at, again, at all the vast communities we have, how do you weave that into a food and beverage experience? It's like nothing else. That's
interesting. Well, I think what I think is great is we have two great teams now with great cultures and great leadership, and we have a third on deck here. And they're different in age. Obviously, it's a different sport, draws a different fan base, different demographic, and I think your new addition is going to really change the landscape for the better by addition, which is really exciting. We're getting quite a few questions from the audience, so I'll hit a couple here now. Related to, I guess it's the controlling owner concept. Somebody's asked about succession planning in pro sports franchise ownership, and they starting with Tom. Is that something that's already been done in the case of the Blue? I'm not asking for, and I'm certainly not wishing you're not running it. By the way, I want you running it all the time. The same with Bill and Carolyn. But what you're thinking on succession and how far have you planned on that?
We've certainly done some planning on it. The proverbial, if I get hit by a beer truck, maybe one of our beer trucks.
Your own beer truck, yeah.
You never know. So yeah, we have some planning in place for that. I think it's a more complicated topic maybe in this setup that requires one controlling owner. And even though you have multiple partners, investors, but yeah, I mean, we've done some planning in that direction.
And Bill, I hope you smile back at me, but I assume you've done some succession planning with the Cardinals.
We have, my father's done a lot of planning, and our family in general. The way that Cardinals ownership works is my father and mother and there's four of us in my generation, siblings, sort of came in together as a group of investors, and not the whole team, about a third of it actually, and then a bunch of other investors. And we sort of have a plan for if my father gets hit by one of Tom's beer trucks.
That's going to be very expensive, Tom. I got a new
or if I do, or if anyone, we all do a lot of planning in these situations. So, but kind of back to that control person issue for fans. I mean, that's what matters, right? I mean, what we do in terms of shares shifting around generationally and trusts or whatever. It's kind of behind the scenes, but I think for fans should know that the league is monitoring that control person designation, and that some teams have a plan for passing that down if the ownership remains in a family or a tight-knit group, and most likely the plans that any given control person have now to pass that along or designate somebody would be accepted by the league, and that's how it would occur. But in certain cases, you could envision the league saying, no, that's not consistent with what we're trying to achieve, in this particular franchise, and you got to come up with a better alternative. So that can happen, and certainly hope it doesn't happen with me, but it could.
I somehow I don't think it will, but it is interesting. Family businesses generally don't have that higher authority up there saying, "Hey, let's run the business like a business and keep some of the family issues out of it." I think it's just it's not possible to have that. I mean, there is no higher authority in family business generally, but I do think the league, when the league behaves properly as it relates to who the controlling owner is, I think that's a good thing. I can't dispute that. It seems like a good thing to have. Another related question, and I don't think this applies to any of you, but it was just an issue that one of our audience has, is about if you have family ownership of the team, how do you deal with the issue of family members being employed at the team and fairness vis-a-vis non-family members, which is, of course, a classic issue in the traditional family business context. But it doesn't sound like an issue at all at the Blues, and I doubt it's an issue at the Cardinals. And I don't see a lot of the Taylors trying to get a job working in the hot dog stand for the soccer franchise. But would you comment on just what rules you have about owners generally participating in the business itself, how that works?
Yeah, if I'd start by interjecting a discussion that Spencer and I have had from the beginning when we first started talking about this event was my concern that we are not actually a family business because we have, a number of partners and investors. So I may be the controlling operating person, but I don't see this as a family business in that respect. And, and so onto your question, I don't feel the ability to bring my kids into the business like you might if it were truly a family business. So
right, I think, yeah. And by the way, we respect that, and it's just sort of interesting. I think a lot of ownership groups or they sort of morph into a family business because I'm not thinking of you in particular, but the valuation of these sports franchises has just gone through an astronomical growth pattern, and so continued family ownership is often the most efficient way to do it. Bill, I doubt that you have this issue as all either, but maybe comment on the issue of how do family members of owners generally, can they get a job at the Cardinals, or is it they just treated like anybody else?
Yeah, we haven't really put a definitive set of rules in place. We might need to over time if it just keeps going. I mean, we've been at it for 26 years, or 25 plus years. So, it becomes generational in terms of the ownership group that we started with has now, gotten older by 25 years, and their kids are, and it's sort of G1, G2, and G3, as we call it, generation 1, 2, and 3. And G3 is probably ranges from young kids to mid 20s. And we've had some situations where some of them have expressed some interest in doing this or that, and an internship here or there. And I think, we haven't said, there's a hard and fast rule there. It might be something, like I said, where in the future we'll have to, but it hasn't been a big problem or an issue for us.
That's great. But my guess around the league, you do see some of that, and the results probably speak for themselves. But
yeah, there's some groups that have just taken a hard line so that it creates no problems at all. Others who have, put in some, have a little bit of family involvement that they allow for.
Interesting. And Carolyn, I assume this is not an issue. I mean, you have what's interesting, your family has a fairly significant family business, so you know what the rules should be, so you probably don't have this at all.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll be completely honest with you, Spencer, nobody in my generation wants this job. I think they were happy that I was here from day one and was more than happy to step in. And our fourth generation, the oldest is 10.
Oh my gosh.
We have some time.
I was going to say you got a long highway out there to drive down. Our audience has asked, and this would be more for Bill and Tom. Can you comment on the ongoing dispute between Dish Network and Fox Sports Midwest that has included the Cardinals and the Blues? What has been the effect on the team, the market, and the fans? Will it ultimately affect soccer too? I'm not familiar with this one, so if you're prepared to answer that or can respond to it, that'd be helpful. Or maybe you don't want to talk about it.
I can talk real quick, and Tom can supplement. Basically, Fox has our rights as well as the Blues. It's going to soon be renamed Bally Sports, which, as you know, that whole business is going through a transformation, but they obviously do deals with carriers like Charter and Dish and a lot of online sort of TV, things like YouTube TV, et cetera. And they're in a dispute with Dish on how much Dish would pay them on a monthly basis for carrying the games, carrying the channel. And so, it comes down to kind of corporate leverage and issues of negotiating that we certainly hope will get resolved. And the teams first and foremost need our games to be seen by people, and carriage, which is that word for that, is very important to us, more so than the fees we get. That's the lifeblood of our sport, is people seeing it. So we're hopeful that that'll get resolved soon as the approaching Cardinal season comes up and the Blues season gets into a more impactful stage. Tom, any further thoughts on that?
Oh, that's similar to our view. And I mean, obviously fans are upset with that. There are other avenues, but they get more complicated. In some ways, the dish networks of the world are maybe hurting their long-term business as people cut cords or cut satellite and go to more streaming services. But yeah, our hope is that it gets resolved, because we want our fans to see our games, and let's just hope it does. We are, Bill referred to the Bally Sports Network. That's going to be interesting to see that unfold and see how it depicts our games, how it affects our audience, but that's another topic.
I guess, can all your games be seen on live stream now outside the networks? How's that work?
Well, you can buy a package if you're outside of the St. Louis market and see all of our games on MLB TV streaming. If you're in our market, you have to be a subscriber to one of the, channels or outlets that essentially you're paying for by paying for a subscription of, for example, Charter or or Dish or AT&T or what have you. So there's the whole in-market versus out-of-market equation there.
Interesting. And Carolyn, is this something you're focused on yet? I mean, it's going to have an impact on soccer for sure at some point, but you're not sort of there. Is this a topic you want to weigh in on?
No, because I actually don't know what to say. The league is working on their television contracts, but I can honestly say that I don't have any sort of opinion on it right now.
Okay. Carolyn, a question has come in for you, talking about whether you're going to be able to bring in players from places like the Premier League in England or on the continent. Just sort of the whole question of will St. Louis soccer look like European soccer, or how does that strike you as something to talk about?
Sure. So our chief sporting officer, Lutz Pfannenstiel, we recruited him actually from Germany with Hoffenheim, Dusseldorf, and a whole host of other clubs. And so he has a very deep network actually across the globe. And so it's been a lot of fun sort of building out his plan as to how we're going to build a team, whether it's coaches, players, and certainly looking all over the place. So we've had a couple of positions posted, and what's been so exciting is we've had over 300 applications, and they've come from UK, Venezuela, Africa, Canada. And so to be able to see the international draw we're getting, we think is sending a great message. But again, kind of going back to Lutz's ties to Bundesliga and a couple of other international leagues, he really wants to make sure that we cast a very, very wide net. I think that that's one for an attractive. I think it's attractive to, again, everybody who's actually been a soccer fan, but also too, I think it really sends that message. We want to send that this is an international sport. And if we can attract international talent to St. Louis, hopefully it just goes ahead and elevates us a little bit more.
I totally agree. Tom, talk about the success that I don't know if this was intentional, but that the Blues has had with players that have elected after their experience here to stay in St. Louis. And I know obviously some Cardinals have too, but with the Blues, it just seems particularly pronounced, the number of Blues players here. And talk about how that came about, because, a lot of those were foreign players. And I mean, it's a good example for soccer. Maybe that could work there too.
We we do have a number of alums here in the city. You know, the numbers are around 50 alums are still here. And as I mentioned the other day, a number of them, for a number of them, St. Louis was not the last stop. And yet along the way, they found St. Louis so appealing that they decided when their careers were over, that they would move to St. Louis. And I think it actually has a lot to do with, we're talking about culture, in this case, the culture of the city, as well as the organization. For the most part, these are Canadian players. And I think that they were comfortable in St. Louis because it's a little more laid back. It has a Midwestern sensibility, isn't a sharp elbowed place, lots of things to do, easy to get around, those sorts of things. But they were well treated here. They liked the people and decided to stay. And it's a real asset, I think, for us and for the community, and especially for the youth hockey community. A lot of the alums are involved in coaching youth hockey and really dedicated to it. And it has led to, development of some real top players coming out of St. Louis.
Which is amazing. And that's both men and women players coming out, because the female hockey players coming out of town is pretty incredible too.
Yeah, it is. That's really stepped up in the last several years. And, we have also emphasized support for women's and girls hockey in the last few years. So I think that's only going to get stronger.
That's interesting. I was reading about thinking of this program and the dominance in sort of top of mind of the top professional sports in our country being football, baseball, hockey, and basketball, of course. What's so interesting is that soccer is much more widely played at the youth level than as equal to all the other sports, and certainly not probably as much as baseball. But it's interesting that this idea that we may be on the cusp of having a real elevation of the profile of soccer, like you've had in hockey. When you think when we were growing up, there was no professional. I mean, the Blues just arrived here, and it was sort of like, oh, this is interesting. But it was basically a new sport other than pond hockey. And you came from up east where it was played more, and certainly in colleges up there. But it's amazing to think of what's been built because of the presence of the pro team and the opportunity that's created for so many people.
Yeah, and you have the reminiscences of older guys who said, the winter something rink was the only rink in town, and occasionally you get to play on a frozen pond, and now we have so many rinks, and I don't know if many of you have seen the new Centene Community Ice Center, but it really is a top flight facility. I can't imagine a nicer facility in the country.
Yeah, no, it's sort of like you walk to school with no shoes. The people of our generation, we're down at Forest Park in the weekend looking at the pond in front of the museum and telling our son that we used to skate here all the time. I mean, until last week, we really haven't had a cold season like that. Let me turn to a question that our discussion earlier about the stress of COVID has put on teams generally and leagues, and it relates to this. Bill mentioned it, Steve Cohen and the Mets. It's sort of this hedge fund itis using professional sports franchises being sort of like trophies that people hunt out there to be associated with. I'm just curious, is that a threat to the three sports that are represented here, to have people that certainly have way more than the financial wherewithal, but might not love the sport? It goes to this question of, is it a sport? Is it a business? And obviously it's both, but maybe comment on just how that's changing the sport. I'm not casting aspersions on hedge fund managers or anything, but how does that change the dynamics going forward, thinking 10, 20 years down the line, of ownership shift from what's been sort of traditional and it's sort of, because of the valuation of these things, has moved us into this this segment of the market where there's a narrow group of buyers.
I'll jump in on that. You know, having been at it now for a few decades plus, I've kind of seen a trend there, but it isn't like necessarily predictable trend. I can remember back when, you know, Fox, Murdoch owned the Dodgers, for example. The Cubs were owned by the Tribune, and there were a few other corporate ownership structures where that ultimately faded because those corporations had to deal with public shareholders and quarterly earnings, and sports teams aren't very conducive to quarterly earnings reports, I gotta say. So that faded, and it became much more of a partnership model of individual investors. But then it morphs even a little bit more. For example, the Braves are owned by Liberty Media, so that crept back in there in that case. And you can kind of see what their financials look like because they're kind of a public quasi-tracking stock. So it ebbs and flows. You do have the hedge fund manager types. And, you know, of course, anybody coming in now is going to be very wealthy to start with. And depending on how big a group they bring into it, you know, they're going to be writing big checks, et cetera. So it just changes the dynamic a little bit. But ultimately, going all the way back to our original topic of control person, that's what matters, right? The person making the decision of the organization, setting culture, making key player and strategic investment decisions. And I think you can have multiple types of structures and have it work if that person is competent and thinking ahead and so forth. But it does matter. Ownership structure matters to a degree. I find that for us, you know, you look at the three of us here, we're very community oriented in St. Louis. You see us around at events and things. That wasn't the case with the Rams. I mean, nobody saw Stan Kroenke around. I don't think in St. Louis much. I never met him. I mean, I was here for.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see Tom every week, you know, and Carolyn at stuff, and we talk about anything. And so I think we're kind of lucky in St. Louis that there's that very much community feeling, and we do a lot with the Blues. I'm sure we'll do with soccer too. In terms of collaborative things. So that's important, and you don't see that as much in other cities. Of course, you see it to a degree, but the universal nature of it here in St. Louis is something I think is worth pointing out, and it's a tribute to the community itself. Tom mentioned some things that are attractive about it, and we all appreciate those things.
Well, I'd say we're, as citizens and fans, we're fortunate to have the three of you doing it too. And I do think it's unusual with, you know, three great sports franchises to have the local ownership, have the local focus, and have people that are out and about in the community. I mean, it's incredible. I'm interested in this idea of collaboration. What maybe Carolyn or Tom talk about what is possible along those lines with the seasons have some overlap. The fan bases have some overlap, but they're very different. The power of sports, given how important sports viewing is by the citizenry, and it's such an elevator of emotions for everybody. What other kinds of collaboration could there be between the three teams? I'm just sort of curious if the other things have come to mind.
You know, it's an interesting phenomenon because I think when sports are at their best, what they're doing is uniting a community, and you see that certainly, you know, with an individual team. When the Cards are in the playoffs, when the Blues are in the playoffs, they just bring people together, and then you take another step when the teams themselves are collaborating and pulling together. There is something almost visceral in the reaction of people in the city when they see that their teams that, you know, in theory, they're competing for customers and fans, but in fact, they're coming together it just further has a uniting influence on the community, I think.
Well, I think now with the three venues so closely located, I think the excitement for downtown St. Louis, I mean, I think it's going to be an enormous boost to the regional psyche, but in particular to the prominence of the city of St. Louis, which is obviously highly desirable. Carolyn, you want to jump in on this? I do think it's interesting. You mentioned the technology at your facility. This is an advantage of a new entrant that you're building something new, so you can adopt all the new gizmos. It's a little harder to do when your venue's a little older. But talk about, if you would, things you've thought about that could work collaboratively with the Cardinals and the Blues, if anything comes to mind.
Well, I think starting with, how do you turn this into downtown hustle and bustle all weekend? So some of my favorite times are there's a Cardinals day game and a Blues hockey game at night. And I think if you factor in, again, whether it's food and wine festivals, whether it's music festivals, but if you look at what the end goal is, and that is to have people come down, stay downtown, get a hotel room, and really truly enjoy everything that it has to offer in a weekend, I think would be the goal. For soccer, we're sort of the hub of the Midwest, right? So you've got just as many cities that either have a baseball team or a hockey team. And so what we're seeing is other owners actually are getting excited because Kansas City is a 4-hour drive, Chicago's a 5-hour drive. And since that whole derby rivalry concept is so fierce in soccer, to be able to have opportunities, for Nashville FC to come and the Predators. And so I think Tom's exactly right. This city unites around sports like I've never seen. And I've even had other owners in other cities comment to me, you guys are just crazy about all of your sports, which is great, helping me sell our story to MLS. So thank you both very much. But I do think it needs to be broader. I think it needs to be bigger. So going back to, like I said, whether it's concerts, whether it's food and wine, but I think the proximity of all three of these beautiful venues, each having their own uniqueness. You've got Stiefel Theater as well. What a great location to have some kind of music festival or theater. And so I think it's going to be I think it's really exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think nothing's off the table. But going back to what both of these gentlemen have said, I think the local ownership that care about the community really is a blessing in the sense that it can be collaborative, and it can be really for the greater good of the region.
It really is. It's an exciting prospect to look forward to have the three of you in operation at the same time with fans in the stadiums. That's what we really want. So, Bill and Tom, what advice would you give to Carolyn that you could share with her on how to be successful? What should she be thinking about? You've been at it a long time. She's new in her position. What kernels of advice would you proffer to her?
Avoid a pandemic. don't allow. I don't know. I wouldn't presume to give Carolyn too much advice. She knows what she's doing, is doing a fantastic job, and obviously has the leanings toward the community element as well as excellence on the field and everything they do. So I think that the MLS team and Carolyn I think it's just going to be a huge success, and I think it's going to be great for St. Louis, and especially downtown St. Louis.
That's great. Bill, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's what I've heard from Carolyn and those involved in the soccer is really smart to me, how they're looking at building an international and pulling out a little bit more of the diversity that may exist in St. Louis that maybe we haven't done as good a job of in getting to the ballpark or whatever. I think that's such a great strategy. And then I would, because, soccer has been a slightly different demo than other teams. Interesting, we talked about demo. MLB did a bunch of survey work, and we know that our ticket buyers are kind of average age mid-50s. But we've personally, meaning the Cardinals, have done work on who's actually at the ballpark. And we've found that the average age of people at Busch Stadium at games is 35.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
yeah, so it kind of makes sense, right? So, the dad buys the kid a ticket and the kid goes, or whatever. Mom, grandkids, whatever. We do a lot of youth groups and things. So I think, maybe a piece of advice would be is to certainly look at diversifying and grabbing an interesting, truly diverse demographic, but think about it also in terms of age stratification and getting young and old and all of that, and understanding that who buys your tickets might be slightly different than who's using them. And maybe because we're still figuring that out. And the technology and the surveying opportunities that are out there, social media and all this kind of stuff can help her on the front end, whereas we're making it up as we go along. And then also we're here, she can call any of us for advice on anything, and we're happy to help. Because like Tom said, we're rooting for each other. And I think that's a big piece of what makes this a little bit different in St. Louis than perhaps in other markets.
Well, and what a great opportunity for each of you, but for St. Louis to have the three of you working together. Carolyn, you alluded to this rivalry issue with other cities. I think that's kind of a fascinating thing. Can you imagine the combination of rivalries in soccer, hockey, or baseball, all convening in St. Louis for a game at the same time? That would be just kind of extraordinary to bring different cities together like that. That'd be kind of neat.
It's interesting because Kansas City has already started, we can't wait to come, kind of bringing back I-70 Cup, kind of getting more in that sense. Cincinnati, the gentleman there, can't wait for this to start, because the nice thing too is the transportation's easy, and even Dallas FC's jumped in. We can't wait to send busloads of people up there. And so when you start really thinking about what that means and the impact of what it can do, and the social media piece, especially in soccer, is so huge, and to be able to have that hopefully go viral and international, it's exactly what we're trying to create. But again, just being able to have the opportunity to commingle these three sports, these three clubs, these three ownership groups, and the different fan bases is just, I think it's an incredible opportunity that, once again, I think is unique to St. Louis, and we just have to make sure we capitalize on it.
That's great. Well, in the few minutes remaining, first of all, I'd like to ask you, are there questions that we haven't asked of you that you think should have been asked that you'd like to answer for us? Anything that comes to mind that we should have covered, Tom?
I don't think so. Going back to your item about the hedge fund itis, to me, as I look back over the last, several years, it seems like every few years we hear, oh, ownership's going to change now, and it's going to be private equity firms, and it's going to all be different. And you'll see a transaction or two, and then that just goes away. So I don't know. It is true, certainly, that with values going up, and especially the value of MLB teams and NFL teams, it's a steep price, but I'm not sure that model is going to go very far.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, what do they say? I mean, you need culture, strategy, and leadership. Money is not in that equation there. And I think the culture, as we've discussed today, is the hardest part to get right. And that's really about state of mind and values and behavior. And you're not going to fool players as to what's a hospitable environment. I mean, that's just not going to happen. You're living in a bubble of social media and transparency, and hiding the goods on your fan base or your player base is just not possible. So I think it has to be genuine, and that's sort of the key. And you guys, you're living that. Bill, anything we've missed that you'd like to bring up or thought you should have a little more emphasis on?
No, this was a great discussion. I think it's really cool to see how the different teams are handling different issues around culture and strategy for getting their fans in and all of that. I've enjoyed it.
Well, good. Thank you. And Carolyn, how about you? Is there something that you wish we had asked you?
No, actually, I think I agree with Bill and Tom. I mean, it's always fun to get together, even though it's virtual. Certainly love the advice, and thank you for offering that I can call you anytime. I'm sure I will. But no, I think we're just excited, and of course, I need to thank the community for all the support and our staff. This is basically a startup, and so there are days where your job is not beautiful. But everybody's working hard, and we're just excited to be able to launch a lot more of exciting things coming and to continue more success.
Well, we're excited for all three of you and the future of these great sports teams here. I want to ask Peter Baumgarten to get on the line here to wrap up. Peter, and then you're welcome to ask the panelists some questions. I know you've got some, so you've got time. So fire away at them or me or whatever you want to do. But I think they've done a great job, so I want to thank them.
No, this is perfect. I can't add any more value beyond what you've already done there, Spencer. So again, Carolyn, Tom, and Bill, thank you for joining us. This was a fantastic session and really appreciate it. I want to just offer a few final thanks here just to close this off. Thank you, Spencer, for your excellent moderation of the panel. You always do an amazing job in your preparation. I'm always kind of in awe of the various different insights you have on various different parts of the business and family ownership and the like. I want to actually make an interesting comment. During the symposium, I received a text from a former student who graduated from WashU, former student and now friend who's joining the session. He works in sports in a city up north off of 55. I won't tell you exactly what it is. And yet he said one of the things that he loves about St. Louis is the fact that you can pull together these three individuals into conversations in ways that would be difficult if you're in New York or Chicago or Miami. So really appreciate your ability and willingness to engage with us, to share some insights around how you think about ownership and culture and the strategy of your organizations. I would be remiss if I did not thank the various different people a part of the group that we have here, the Koch Center. Spencer is one of them, but we also have Bart Hamilton, who's our center's research director, Alex Hyman, who's our associate director, and Amanda DeBoard, who supports the center in various different ways. There's also various different support behind the scenes on this from a technical standpoint, from marketing and digital and the like that are preparing us for this particular event. I want to thank as well the St. Louis Sports Commission for making this city what it is, for promoting the event, and for us to have an honor to welcome some of you from the commission in here to conversation. And then finally, I want to thank the Koch family, the entire Koch family, Paul, Roger, Elke, and Fran, for your support at the symposium and the broader center as a whole. It's our hope as we move forward to be able to bring these types of events to you more frequently, whether it's events, thought leadership, formalized academic research that helps us think about our own businesses, whether private, family, or otherwise, moving forward. So once again, thank you all for joining us here today. It's been a real pleasure. Great to have so many of you on the line engaging in the conversation. And let's see if we can get some nice winning seasons moving forward. Looking forward to it.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks.